Astronauts arrive on Mars with the intention of colonizing it, but they discover that this isn't the first time. Astronauts are throwing a farewell party. The next day, Nicholas the bad guy is attempting to get bedded one more before heading out on a mission to Mars. The only married pair on the trip, Woody and Blake, together with the foreign astronauts, Sergei and Renee, and Phil and Luke, will be traveling in 2 teams. While waiting for Jim, another astronaut, to arrive at the celebration, Luke's wife encourages him to speak with their son Bobby before departing. Bobby tells Luke that he would miss him and wonders who will read to him while Luke is gone. After the party, Jim, Woody and Luke are having a great time when Jim mentions a woman named Maggie and everyone becomes really sad. A conversation between Jim and Luke reveals that Maggie was Jim's wife and also an astronaut. Jim and Maggie dreamed of going to Mars and spent their entire lives working towards it, but when the time came, Maggie fell ill and Jim withdrew from the Mars program to take care of her. Eventually, Maggie passed away. Luke says that he will be reading the same book in space every night that Bobby will read, so at least they will read the book together. When Luke exits, it's evident that he is also angry. Luke claims that Jim and Maggie deserve to travel to Mars more than anybody else and that he is disappointed that they won't go there. Jim responds that it's okay. 13 months later, Nick, Luke, Renee, Sergei, and their team have arrived on Mars. One of their rovers has spotted an unusual mountain, and after analyzing it, they have determined that it is likely ice, and that underneath it may be a whole water reserve. They have sent a message to the World Space Station, where Woody, Terry, Phil, and Jim are present. As Luke and the crew arrive at the unique mountain, they hear a weird signal in their headsets. They use a radio wave radar to examine the mountain, and the findings indicate that the mountain is metal below the dust rather than ice. They notify the station that they will be traveling out to explore the unusual mountain. As they bring the radar closer and apply more power to acquire an exact reading, Luke thinks there must be a mistake and a powerful energy pulse emerges from the mountain. Each one of their equipment fails. A tornado then forms, sucking everything inside. It moves like a sentient being, killing Sergei, Renee and Nick, but Luke survives. After the tornado passes, the location of the mountain on the World Space Center is revealed, and an emergency meeting is called due to the detection of an intense electrical pulse from Mars. Subsequently, almost all of the signals are lost. A video transmission that almost functions but depicts a very hurt Luke telling that his squad has been assaulted and that everyone is dead is received. Woody attempts to persuade the World Space Station's captain to send a rescue mission for Luke, but the captain responds that Luke may already be dead and that there is no way for them to know if traveling to Mars is safe because all communications have ceased. Phil counters that they can obtain information from a Saturn probe that is approaching Mars and use that information to plan their mission, and the captain agrees. Woody informs the captain that Jim is the best qualified pilot for the voyage and that he and Maggie created all of the mission plans for Mars, thus the mission will only succeed if Jim pilots the spacecraft. A few months later, while the crew of Jim, Woody, Terry and Phil is approaching Mars, the captain first refuses but ultimately accepts. Phil is creating DNA from sweets when Jim comes and consumes his candy. Woody notifies Jim that the Saturn probe would be approaching Mars in a few hours, providing them with the necessary knowledge to land. The probe's photos reveal 3 planets in the vicinity of the previous team's base camp. Although Terry argues that this simply indicates that no one remained to bury Luke, Phil interprets this as evidence that Luke is still alive. They believe there must be a problem with the probe because, as they get ready to enter Mars, micrometeoroids begin to strike their craft, creating holes where air begins to leak. With the team's assistance, Woody closes up the holes on the inside and exterior, but they are unaware that the meteoroids have also damaged their fuel tanks, causing gasoline to flow out as they launch into Mars' atmosphere. Soon as they turn on the engine, their spacecraft explodes, leaving them with no other option except to leave for space while wearing only their interconnected suits. Their target, a refueling module from a previous mission orbiting Mars, is farther away than they had anticipated, so Woody decides to take a grappling gun wire, use up all the fuel in his jetpack, and fly at the refueling module at full speed, tying the wire to it so the others can reach it safely. He tries the maneuver, succeeds in tying the wire, but overshoots and is left stranded in space with no fuel left in his jetpack. Terry is heartbroken and demands that they save Woody, but Jim and Woody both realize that it isn't feasible because their jetpacks are empty. Terry tries to rescue Woody despite his warning to stop and return before she runs out of petrol and becomes trapped herself. She tries to use the grapple gun to pull Woody back, but the cable is just barely long enough to reach him. Terry promises to approach closer and try again, but Woody sees she would murder herself in an attempt to save him, so he takes off his helmet and gives his life to stop Jim. Terry and Phil succeeded in landing the refueling module on Mars, arriving at the former mission's base camp. They discover that much of the equipment is broken but still fixable, so they can take it home with them. When Jim discovers that plants are growing in the experimental greenhouse, he is shocked. Luke then attacks Jim from behind. Luke is in terrible shape and believes that Jim is having a hallucination, but Jim persuades Luke that this is reality by telling him that he is reading a book that his son Bobby is also reading back on Earth. Luke then calms down and tells them about the incident that killed the rest of the team rather than just saying he survived. He claims that there was a purpose for his salvation, which was to discover the secret. Jim queries Luke about the secret he is discussing, and Luke responds by showing them a photo of the enormous metal face. It turns out that this is the well-known face on Mars, which was previously seen from satellites but was thought to be merely a mountain. Jim inquires about the signal Luke's team heard when they were near the face. Luke replies that it was placed there by someone so they could see it. He has been studying the signal for a year and has discovered that the pattern of the signal in physical dimensions created the image of a DNA molecule. He claims that the face is a self-portrait of the creatures that placed it there, signifying their identity and statement. After they are preparing to travel home, Jim spills some sweets, which reminds him of his talk with Phil. Terry recognizes the DNA image is not a signature and that the final pair of chromosomes is missing, proving the sample is not human. The face attacked Luke's crew because the radio signals from their radar were misinterpreted. It's a test the aliens want them to complete to show they are human. Jim informs the rest of the team that, in the event that they fail to reconfigure the radio waves from the radar to provide the correct answer, filling the final 2 chromosomes, the entire mission would have been in vain and everyone's death would have been in vain. To be safe, they use a rover to send the radar to the face. There, they transmit the radio wave containing the correct answer to the DNA riddle, and a white doorway opens up in the face. Jim, Terry and Luke make the decision to proceed to the face, where they instruct Phil to mend the journey module and go once he's finished, regardless if they come back or not. Jim, Terry and Luke enter through the face's doorway, which closes behind them and cuts off radio communication with Phil. They discover the atmosphere inside is breathable air and remove their helmet to enter a 3-dimensional model of the solar system, which depicts Mars as a blue and green planet and tells the tale of how people once lived there before a meteor struck and destroyed the planet. A slender red being then emerges from behind Luke. Terry and Jim are shown the tale of how the inhabitants of Mars departed in spacecraft to settle in other galaxies, but one of the ships was abandoned and their DNA was uploaded into it. The first single-celled organisms on Earth were brought here by this ship, and over millions of years, those organisms developed into modern humans. Life on Earth originated on Mars, and the face of the planet was placed there in hopes that one day humans would be able to return and discover their origins through radio contact with. When Phil re-emerges, he informs them that a storm is approaching and they must go back to the module in order to return home. Jim understands that the face is, in fact, a spacecraft, and that the countdown to its departure has started. Jim announces he will be remaining here as Terry and Luke start to depart. He states that everything that has happened is an invitation for them to see their Martian ancestors, and he intends to accept as it is his destiny. Terry and Luke consent to Jim's departure. Jim is lifted into a small ship and placed in a compartment. The water starts to rise in the compartment, and Jim gets worried and holds his breath. However, as the water rises all the way up, he realizes he can breathe in it and has flashbacks of his entire life with his friends and his wife Maggie. Terry and Luke escape and barely make it to the return journey module in time as Phil is about to leave. As Terry looks forward to exploring a new world. As Phil and Luke leave the atmosphere of Mars in the return journey module, they see Jim's ship take off and travel to a different galaxy. As the spacecraft sails into outer space, Luke wishes Jim luck in realizing that his friend is ultimately fulfilling his destiny. Thank you for watching, and if you like the video guys, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more such content.